The Square Ball Podcast.
Now, with me today is a different lineup. We've got Chris, we've got Rob, we've got myself, Dean Smith, and we're taking a bit of a dive into deadline days. Deadline days just passed, and it passed as everyone kind of anticipated it would do. A couple of signings in, no outgoings, but that wasn't always the case, was it, boys? I think where we should start, before we get to the headline acts, of course, which is don't go to bed just yet, let's start with a couple of dark days in Leeds United deadline history. Let's start with Becchio being swapped out for Morrison. Rob, how did this feel at the time?
I think this is about as sad as Leeds United got.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. There was a lot of sad days, wasn't there? But this one hurt a lot. I remember being at university in Nottingham, and actually I was ready to buy an Argentina shirt with Becchio on the back. Such was my love for that man. And then our hearts were broken and replaced with a man who everyone absolutely hated.
Well, yeah, just to take us back in time, this was the 31st of January, so it wasn't the summer window, 31st of January 2013. It was GFH's first window in charge. What a way to announce yourself as being a load of dickheads who don't know what they're fucking doing than making this deal. Our top scorer, Becchio, goes to Norwich, and in the deal, somehow, if I remember rightly, we gave them Becchio and some cash for Morrison to come the other way. That's like swapping caviar for diarrhea, as far as I'm concerned. Doesn't make any fucking sense. I'm paying for the privilege as well. What were your memories of this, Chris?
Yeah, I think, wasn't it that Morrison was valued at 3 million, Becchio at 2.7, so I think we ended up paying 300 grand plus Becchio, if I remember correctly. That, I mean, if this had happened in the summer, it might have been okay. But, not that it might have been okay, but just like the end of January, Neil Warnock's your manager, you've got some clowns in charge of the club, and you trade most people's favourite player for some prick, basically.
Well, he was everyone's favourite player by then, right? Because everyone else has left.
Yeah.
And you forget that Becchio was so much fun at the start of that season, even though it was Neil Warnock and pretty much everything else was horrible. But Becchio was scoring loads of goals, scoring volleys, bouncing the ball off a keeper's head before he took a penalty, then Penenkering it in. And then like he was the only thing fun about Leeds United because everyone was going to Norwich, and then we sent him to Norwich.
Yeah, if you read the transfers from that year, Peltier, Pearce, Kenny, Varney, Warnock, Morrison, Green, Juve, Drury, Norris.
Great.
Jesus Christ.
Fucking hell. I feel like I'm coming out in hives just listening to that list. My God. I think this, again, just to kind of pull on the romance of this, or lack there fucking of romance. Becchio we signed after a successful trial. He was a free transfer, and so he felt very much like he was ours. He was our find. He'd not found a home anywhere else. And then to swap him out for just this grizzled championship bastard. And let's be fair, Morrison, decent record-ish at this level, but for us, he was absolutely wank. He couldn't hit a barn door.
Yeah, that's basically it. Like there are no redeeming features about Steve Morrison as a footballer, and I've never met him, but as a person too.
He's Mr. Millwall, isn't he?
Yeah.
He was never going to fit in at Leeds. Even under Warnock, he was still shithouse then. And then he seemed to hate us as much as we hated him. Like every time he came back with Millwall then, he was a little prick. And it was always like, what point are you trying to prove? Like, yeah, I was crap for you. Have that. Oh, just bugger off.
It was like he thought he deserved our respect without having earned it at any point. Whereas Becchio had so much credit in the bank, had played so well with strike partners like Beckford, and then eventually when he ended up front by himself, he'd just constantly done so well, scored so many brilliant goals. Surely even someone like Steve Morrison would read the room, come in and go, oh, I need to do some fucking work here to make sure that they like me enough.
Becchio also scored 15 league goals by the end of January in that season, which, like, you know, if he'd stayed, he would have easily broke 20, maybe 25. But, like, oh my God.
This is the season where he was scoring against Chelsea as well, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah, in December in the League Cup.
And everything's just, well, that game wasn't fun, the rest of it, but that was a good moment. And yeah, Morrison never had any of them. And it's interesting with Morrison, like he did have this rapid ascent through the divisions and ends up in the Premier League, but then doesn't really do anything there. And just as quickly as he rose, he was back down in League One, back with Millwall, obviously, because he's very much the Neil Harris, isn't he? The new Neil Harris.
Yeah, there's definitely a thing of, I don't want to say that Steve Morrison was a bad footballer, well, I personally think he was, but I think
You saw him at Leeds, right?
It's not just because he was at Leeds. I think some players fit into certain systems, managers, teams, environments, areas, whatever. And Morrison was Millwall. He just didn't fit at Leeds. But at the same time, Becchio was Leeds. Only Leeds got him, if you know what I mean. Like, no one else really appreciated him in the way, like, if you go outside of Leeds and talk about Luciano Becchio, most people will just stare at you blankly because he didn't do all that much at Norwich, and then Rotherham and a handful of lower league clubs in Spain. So, like, he is, it's very easy to throw around the word legend, but of that era, there's not all that much to cling to. So people like him.
He's a hero.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like you just touched on there, in a time when there was not much for us to get excited about, he was somebody who we could get excited about. He was somebody, even in the early days with his long, beautiful hair, sloshing around in the rain of the Riverside Stadium or wherever he was scoring a goal. And then just to replace him with this thing just didn't feel right. Just to close off this particular dark day, that wasn't the only deal we did that day. We also got a young man called Habib Habibou, who, if you can't remember, is a 6'4" duck thrower. He played 4 games for us, no goals, no assists, but still has some sort of cult status within the Leeds United ranks.
Speaking of heroes, here's another one. I mean, I do much prefer Habib Habibou than Steve Morrison. I'm not sure I ever saw Habibou play live for Leeds, which is actually a bit of a regret because I would like to have seen how bad he was. But I do remember by the end of that season, we still had a few games to go and they just let him go on holiday. It's like, it's okay, Habib. You're not needed here.
Did they really? I don't remember that.
Yeah, but then also, like, for years afterwards, he was still tweeting about Leeds and he'd tweet Ross McCormack and stuff. And someone actually tweeted him asking about Steve Morrison and he just replied saying, Morrison, lol. Go on, Habib. He gets it.
Two-footed. A couple of years before this, 31st of August 2011, this is maybe where things started to take a really sharp nosedive. We sold on deadline day. Max Gradel sold him to Saint Etienne with no replacement. There was no time to bring him in, to bring anyone in. And if you guys remember this, whilst I was doing some research for the show, I found an article with this idea, this quote in, and it just fucking blew my mind. Bates claimed that we lost money on that deal after you work in the exchange rate. Why is he making that deal then? What on God's green fucking earth was going through this guy's head? And what happened after that with Howson going in the January, Snoddy going in the summer? It just really seemed like all of the goodwill that we'd built up through League One just evaporated in one decision. Just said, there's your best player, off your pop.
Yeah, I think this deal, and just to go back to Becchio briefly and tie it into this, like, Becchio scored 19 goals that season before. There was a lot of momentum. Leeds could easily have done the double promotion straight back to the Premier League, and we didn't capitalise on it in that January, and we just killed it, beat it to death basically at the end of August by selling Gradel. And no wonder Howson went in January, no wonder Snodgrass went. Like, you could see where it was going. As for the exchange rate, I don't know. Like,
you're not an accountant.
No. He should have gone to the border between the north and south of Ireland and exchanged his pounds for euros with someone who needed the euros more than the pounds, maybe.
I mean, Bates always just talked bollocks like that, didn't he? It was always our agents' fees, exchange rate, and then you think, well, where has that money gone, I wonder? But it obviously didn't go to Simon's war chest. But we did replace him with Danny Pugh eventually. But yeah, going back to, it was the season before, wasn't it, when we were just back to the Championship after promotion from League One. And you're right, like, again, it was another really fun season. And we were so close to doing something good and fun, even if it was just getting in the playoffs, because we know how that would have ended. But it was around that Christmas time, we were top of the league. And then going into January, I've chatted to Simon Grayson about it before, and he was saying he just wanted a centre-half. I think he named, who was the Northern Ireland player? Macaulay.
Gareth Macaulay, yeah.
He was available very cheap. And Bates didn't want to pay it because he thought, well, he's getting old and he's not worth it. And it was about 8 years later or something, he was playing in the Euros still. And you think, we really messed that up.
Yeah, he was available for like 150,000, if I remember, around that time. It was a disgracefully low amount of money, but then he had years in the Premier League for West Brom, didn't he? So, typical.
It's this idea of really short-sighted business decisions that maybe we've got accustomed to this summer as well, with having to become PSR champions, selling Archie and Georgie and all that kind of stuff on a much smaller scale, not deciding not to buy a centre-back that's going to help us propel us up the league. But it's just the fucking boring business side of football that drains the romance out of everything. But yeah, that season, I think, is probably the season that we really regressed to our regular 15th place finish and just kept there until that gorgeous Argentinian man wandered out of Rosario into our midst. But those two examples of deadline days, just to kind of pitch how grim it was, do not come anywhere near, I don't think, what we're about to talk about, which is the Don't Go to Bed Just Yet. Not the podcast. This is the only podcast you need. But this was a really specifically dark day in Leeds United transfer history, because it wasn't just ridiculous, it was also incompetent and had a cast of ridiculous characters all over the globe. This particular chapter in Leeds United history, we could probably do a series of shows over, but we're going to try and do a little bit.
Just on that, actually, sorry, there is a series in the magazine this season. Paddy Gunn is writing about going back 10 years to chat about this season in every issue. So look out for that, because we need to do an article in every mag because, like you say, there is a lot to cover.
An awful lot to cover. And also, Chris is writing a blog at the minute, which is going to be up on the website. So we're going to come over to you, I think, Chris, and let's see if we can have a little wander through this day. Take us back to that delicious September night in 2014.
It's almost hard to know where to start other than just shouting Leonardo Pavoletti and seeing if it triggers something in your mind, like some sort of sleeper cell.
And let's just timestamp that tweet as well. So it's 9:49 p.m. on September the 1st, 2014. Don't go to bed just yet. Yeah, sorry, what were you saying, Chris?
Because at that point Leeds thought, pretty much everyone, because of Massimo Celino, thought that Leonardo Pavoletti was in the building, was about to sign.
Because he told club staff that he was signing, right? It's not, this isn't a pipe dream. Your owners rung you up and said, right, this is happening. So I understand why they would want to.
He was in Italy at that point, and this looked great. Obviously, we didn't know who it was, but I can see why everyone would have been getting excited, because we'd already signed Antonucci, who'd scored double figures, 19, I think, the year before in Serie B. And then you had Pavoletti, who'd done the same. He scored 23, 24. So two of the top scorers in the Italian second division. There's your front two sorted. Ross McCormick, Ross who. But then it just evaporated from there.
It did. So 9:49, like I said, don't go to bed just yet. The club then decided to retweet Jason Pearce. Now, this is a nice little side storyline, side quest that happened here. They decided to retweet Jason Pearce, where he said, "Ooh, this is decent." Now, Rob, was he talking about the prospective signing of Pavoletti, or was he talking about something completely different?
He was definitely not talking about that signing, whatever you may think. He had no idea that whatever Celino was up to in Miami at that point. No, he was obviously tweeting about the TV series Power, which I can't say I've ever heard of. But yeah, he had to clarify that 11 minutes after his original tweet, which must have been when he got a few text messages or calls from someone at the club who I assume was very tired by that point.
Yeah. I mean, just if Leeds United as a circus keeps on just giving us these beautiful and ridiculous moments, this is perfectly exemplified here. Club thinks something's happening. Club captain tweets about something with no relevance whatsoever to the transfer. The club retweet that. Ooh, this is decent. And then he has to go. Yeah, he tweeted 11 minutes later saying Power with some clapping hands emojis, and then an hour later, buzzing off the TV series Power. He just having to distance himself from this whole thing. And then everybody knows where the story goes. At 10 to 11. 9 minutes before the deadline, the club confirmed that Matt Smith was fucking off to Fulham. And then 2 minutes before the deadline, Dominic Poleon wandered off this mortal coil towards Oldham for an undisclosed fee. Who are the characters in this? Who are the main? Who have we got to blame or praise for this most ridiculous chapter in our transfer history?
I mean, basically, it is Celino's fault. Celino, I mean, not to go to that meme of Charlie and Always Sunny with all the papers on the wall, but at that point, you've got a very clear recruitment strategy, which in hindsight seems to have been that Nicola Salerno, who was the director of football, whatever, had come from Cagliari after being at Catania, and we had signed 3 players from Catania. The manager he worked with at Catania was now the manager of Chievo, who we had signed Marco Silvestri from and tried to sign a couple of other players from. And obviously the Cagliari links, because Celino had just sold them that summer. So, there's still a relationship there. It's basically like, right, Nicola, Massimo, who do we know? Okay, right, let's say we're signing this guy. Because Pavoletti, at that point, is kind of hot property in Italy. I want to say he's 2020 Patrick Bamford.
Right. He's playing behind closed doors.
I don't think I've sold that very well.
No.
But so he's just come off a really good year in Serie B. He's at Sassuolo, who are sort of like a little bit like Brighton, but just like a farm for players. And then I don't know how we thought we were signing him, because we didn't have any money. And we'd already signed our striker that day, Brian Montenegro.
Exactly. I mean, what more could we have wanted?
So what you have is this guy who we think that we're signing, who eventually ends up staying at Sassuolo, goes to Genoa for 3 million. And by 2017, Napoli have bought him for nearly 20 million euros. So did we miss the boat? Were we ever on the boat? Was there a boat? Was the boat the Titanic? Who knows?
This is just Celino's life, though, isn't it? You imagine every day of his life is like this. Like, I don't know, he's put an offer in for a house and then going, actually, fuck this. I'm just going to go home. And they're like, mate, you've already sold your house. Like, you've just given the keys to a random stranger you saw on the street. He's like, oh, fuck, I'm going to have to buy another house now. I mean, I chatted to Don Poleon about this day, and I think he said that he'd been offered a new contract and he was all ready to sign that. And then we're actually like, oh, no, sorry, you got to go live in Oldham now, which I can't imagine was a great moment for him in his life.
No, I mean, I've worked extensively in Oldham. It's not particularly well, yeah, it's not great. But as far as a day goes in the calendar of football, how much have we been indoctrinated into thinking that transfer deadline day has to be this big swooshing Jim White's there in a yellow tie? How much do we actually give a fuck about transfer deadline day?
I think I used to a good bit more when I had general interest in other football, but I would say the Dan James deadline day in January 2019 probably broke my soul in terms of deadline day, because it was just like, is this really what football's become? It was funny when Peter Odemwingie was driving into a car park of a team that he wasn't signing for and all that, but yeah, I would say, has there been a more iconic deadline day than August 2014 or September 2014? Because has there ever been another deadline day that has produced the name of a podcast?
Not off the top of my head.
Just thinking about Dan James, actually, he's had a few rough ones, hasn't he? So he had the failed move from Swansea to Leeds, and then we accidentally loaned him to Fulham, and then tried to sign half a dozen strikers, one of which was Kelechi Iheanacho, who was playing for Leicester at the time, and then ended up with Wilf Nonto having to pack his bags as a teenager and move across Europe 6 months or even a year earlier than expected, which, I was going to say we kind of got away with that. We did get relegated, and that was probably unsurprising given the way things were going at the club at that time.
Yeah, very much so. But just to kind of round this episode off, how do we feel about the transfer deadline day that just happened? Are we happy with the 2 incomings? Schmidt, we've not seen yet. But Tanaka came on for 8 minutes in the Hull game and looked all right. Do we feel like we've got what we need?
All I'll say is Rob and I have been singing the tequila song all morning.
I went to the toilet before, upstairs in the office, and I caught myself humming it. And I was like, its proximity to Ellen Road is leaking into me.
It's really tormenting me, but I think that's probably a good sign for a chant.
Will we get sick of it before the season's out? I don't think so.
Not when he's scoring the winner to get us promoted, don't you worry.
Yeah, he looks good. He looked good in the 8 minutes that he was on the pitch, yes, but I thought he looked quite smart. I'm still Team Gruev. I still think he's a fantastic midfielder, and he seems to be growing into his role a little bit more, and probably helped by having someone like Ampadu to just do all the dirty work. But I think, I mean, not that I'm no tactical guru, but I think away from home, like if we're struggling, why not have a midfield 3 of Gruev, Ampadu and Tanaka and just control the game a little bit more rather than have Joel Peru stand pumping shots 10 yards wide from 25 yards out.
Hey, he scored at the weekend. Get his name out of your mouth.
Yeah.
I did enjoy with Tanaka. It is that shock of the new thing. Like, he came on and played a 10-yard square pass, and everyone went mad, gave him a big round of applause, and it was Ole's. And you think, if that was like half an hour in and it was still 0-0, and it's Gruev just passing the ball sideways, everyone's like, fucking get it forward.
But can you imagine what it must feel like to be Tanaka, come to a place like Leeds, and people are going mad, like chanting your name. You've been on it's the 80th minute, it's 2-0. It's basically a training exercise, and 35,000 people are singing your name. Like, that must feel pretty immense.
Absolutely, as it does every time that the window shuts, which draws a close here to our transfer deadline day special episode on the Guide 2s. More stuff to come this week, of course, but we will speak to you guys later. Thank you so much.
The Square Ball Podcast.